talk today about quantum leaping, quantum everything. What the heck is quantum leaping? What does it mean? Why do we say that? I see a lot of the new age spiritual people and money attractor type people and people who are talking about abundance and manifesting and all of that, all of a sudden really take over this word called quantum. And I want to give a deeper dive into what this word means. I see so many woo-woo people talking about quantum this, quantum that, quantum energy, quantum leap, quantum blah, 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 blah. And it always makes me laugh because I'm like, do you even know what you're saying? Which is totally okay. Everyone is welcome to use the word. But I want to dive into what does quantum leap mean? And I want to talk about other dimensions and just get really weird with you today. So what does the word quantum mean? Before we dive in, we can wait for more people to hop on, and if not, we will just get started. But I want to talk about what this word quantum means. There's so much here, guys. It is crazy. I think your mind is going to be blown. Your mind is going to be blown at everything quantum and what it truly means and what you're actually saying when you say the word, oh, I'm quantum leaping, oh, quantum this, quantum that, blah, blah, blah. So we know that quantum, we've heard of the word or the phrase quantum physics and quantum mechanics. So we know it has some scientific basis, but what does it really mean? So the word quantum derives from the Latin root of the word, which means how much. That's why we also say the word quantity, like it's an amount of something. And the word quantum, when we define it as like quantum physics or whatever, it means how much, it means an amount, and it means on a very, very, very small scale. So in quantum mechanics, it's a very discrete packet of energy. That's how scientists refer to it as, a discrete packet of energy. So what the heck does that mean? Well, in math and in science, the word things can be described as discrete or continuous. So discrete, remember we just talked about discrete packets of energy. Discrete means like there's certain amounts involved, like it can only be 1, 2, 3, 4, or 5. For example, imagine if you're counting like how many children are in a classroom or how many kittens are in a litter. There can only be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 kittens in a litter. There can't be like 1.0001 kittens. No, you can only, the base energy is a kitten. So you can only count kittens discretely, 1 kitten, 2 kitten, 3 kitten. You can't do it continuously. Whereas something like running a mile or measuring how much water you have. If you're running a mile, you can only count your distance continuously. Distance can only be continuous for us. We can't go from 1 mile to 2 miles. We can't teleport, right? We can only get from 1 mile to 2 miles by going through like 1.5, 1.3, 1.000001 miles. We can only get from 1 to 2 by a continuous stream of counting how long that is. So that's what the difference between discrete and continuous means. In quantum mechanics, remember, each particle has a discrete amount of energy. So we can count particles the way we can count kittens. You have 1 particle, 2 particles, 3 particles, 1 kitten, 2 kittens, 3 kittens. You can't have 1.00001 particles. So let's go back to the word quantum. Quantum is a certain amount of energy. It's a discrete amount of energy. Quantum physics means there's certain amounts of energy involved. And what we're talking about here is a photon is the smallest amount of quantum energy. So 1 photon is the very shortest distance and the very smallest energy that anything can move on a subatomic level. So we notice that atoms go from one energy level to the other energy level to the next energy level. But what's weird about this is that they seem to quantum leap. And when we say this, it's because when atoms move from energy level 1 to energy level 2, they do this by electrons transferring through their energy levels. The electrons transfer from energy level 1 to energy level 2 to energy level 3, whatever. But electrons are only ever caught at the energy levels. So electrons can only be at level 1 or level 2. Even though electrons are traveling from level 1 to level 2, electrons are never ever caught in between. Atoms are never caught in between. You can only be at energy level 1 and energy level 2. And this is weird, right? Because when we travel, when we walk a mile or two, we can only get from mile 1 to mile 2 by going through all the tiny steps in between, 1.0001 miles. We can only travel there. It's impossible. We can be caught at any of those stages, but electrons can only be at 1 or 2. So this is where the term quantum leaping comes from, because it's weird. It seems like they skip all those distances in between. They are instantaneously at energy level 1 and then energy level 2. They skip everything in between. So when New Age people talk about quantum leaping, I know that they just mean you skip a bunch of levels, right? You make $5,000 a month and then you quantum leap and you make $20,000 a month. That's quantum leaping and jumping a lot of levels and skipping the ones in between. And that comes from electrons jumping through levels to get to the next energy level. They can only travel, the smallest distance they can travel is 1 photon, or the smallest energy, like energy level 1 is 1 photon's worth. Energy level 2 is 2 photons. That's not totally scientifically accurate, but we can think of it that way. The difference between the energy levels is 1 photon, and this is the smallest distance that we can imagine. Just like you might know, the fastest we can travel is the speed of light, right? That's the fastest speed. We can't travel faster than the speed of light. That is the fastest. However, these electrons are actually moving faster than the speed of light. The speed of light also has like a speed, which means it has an energy, a speed, and a distance. It has all of the measurements, and what it gets crazy when we apply this quantum leaping to our mind. So first of all, that's the definition of quantum leaping. It's electrons jumping from one energy level to another, and they can never, ever, ever be measured in between. That's what quantum leaping comes from. But let's think about your mind for a second. If that wasn't weird enough, that was just science. Kids learn it in school, I guess. I learned it in college. It's just science. You can learn about even deeper where exactly the electrons are. I was taught in college, like when we did homeworks, electrons can only be in certain spots. There's like a bunch of spots and electrons can only be in one spot. They're never caught traveling because we can't measure that smallly. So I want to talk about consciousness for a second. I talked about these papers before, but I'll bring them up again. So the CIA released documents, they declassified papers from the 80s about something called the gateway process. And inside of these papers, they talk about everything. They talk about consciousness and that we live in a giant universal hologram. They talk about other dimensions, which is what I want to get to today. And I know this is weird science stuff, but it's insanely interesting, guys. So where we currently are at, you and me talking right here, us living in this world, where we are currently at is in our 3D perceived world, right? And what the CIA papers say, the CIA proved that we live in a giant hologram. We live in a 3D projection of a 2D universe. Everything we see is a projection. Everything we see is a hologram, okay? Even if you're not fully on board with that yet, just go with it. We're in our own little space-time dimension, right? We know that part, E equals mc squared. We're in our space-time dimension, time, space, we can feel things, hear things, touch things, we age, we meet each other. Imagine if you were to meet with me, we would say, let's meet Tuesday at 10 o'clock at the McDonald's on the street. You need to define a place and a time and space to meet up. Well, there's also something called, okay, so I guess in our world, when we talk about meeting someone at a time and space, everything is defined. All of those things we talked about, Tuesday, 10 a.m. at the McDonald's on the corner, everything in our world, anything that can enter your mind is because it is defined by its opposite. So we live in a hologram, whatever. We live in a holographic projection of a 2D universe, and holographic projections can only arise because they're defined by its opposite. So holograms are basically energy in motion mixing with energy at rest. So you detect the energy in motion because of the energy at rest. They're different. So that concept is a little bit hard to think about, but think about anything in your life that you can picture in your head. Like a water bottle is defined by not a water bottle. You only can recognize light because there's darkness. You know something is hair because it's not a chair or a shirt or a you. Everything is defined by something that it's not. And that's how you perceive and define objects. Everything that is defined by something that is not, okay? And that is part of the hologram that we're in. It's all energy in motion and energy at rest. And the way you can think about it, seriously, after this live, stretch your mind. Try to think of anything that you can't define with an opposite. It's impossible. So what if energy was only at rest? Energy in motion can only be defined by energy at rest. Anything in motion can only be defined because everything else is at rest. Think about if you are watching people run a race. Okay, the people are running the race. You perceive that person is in motion because the surroundings are still. The road is still, the buildings are still, the grass is still, whatever you're picturing in your head, the surroundings are at rest, the person is in motion. Or think about the fact that all of us are on Earth on one spinning rock, but we're all moving at the exact same speed. Or the objects, me, you, this phone, Instagram, whatever, this computer, I don't know. We're all moving at the same speed, so everything is perceived to be at rest. There is nothing differentiating us at different speeds. We're all at the same speed. So therefore, it's kind of like we're all at rest. Does that make sense? I'm bringing this up because energy can all be at rest. Energy can get to that point where it is only at rest, where energy is not defined by any limits. And if energy is not defined by any limits, it means it is not defined and it is not confined to our time-space dimension. So if energy has no limits, if energy has no boundaries, it can't be confined to a space. I'm only in this space because I'm not in that space and I'm not in that space. Space is inherently defined by its boundaries. And if energy is not defined by any boundaries, there can be no space and there can be no time. And if there is no space and there is no time, and the energy is all just constantly in motion, that means it's all constantly at rest. And this energy is in infinity. There are no boundaries. It is infinite energy. And scientists, physicists call this infinite energy the absolute. The absolute is the same thing that New Age people call the universe and whatever, and how people think of it like after we die or before we're born. New Age spiritual people say, okay, we die and then our souls go into the giant collective energy of souls or whatever. Okay, but we can't perceive that because it's an infinity. And if we were to perceive it, it means that there has to be energy at motion and energy at rest, and there's only energy at rest. So we cannot perceive it from our human 3D projection conscious minds. What does this mean? There's energy in the infinity. There's energy all in the infinity, just one giant cloud of energy in infinity, so we cannot perceive its boundaries. And here we are in 3D time and space that we perceive with our holographic brains, whatever, to get to the absolute from where we are. Notice I've been saying we're in 3D. That's 3 dimensions. The absolute has no dimensions, it's infinity. To get from our 3D reality to the absolute, we need to hop through all these other dimensions. And I know how crazy this sounds. I know I sound like a psycho, but this is real. This is real. And so other dimensions have other properties. Think about something that's 2-dimensional, like the game Pac-Man or whatever. That's just 2D, no dimensions, and then everything we know is 3D. So then what the heck is 4D? What does this truly mean? So there's one physicist that I am a huge admirer of, Jana Levin. She did a lot of research on black holes, and she's one of the people who knows that we're in a holographic universe, and she described dimensions in this way, which I found very interesting. So we know what 2D is, we know what 3D is. and there's something called 4D. And this is the example she brought up, and it has been stuck in my head ever since I heard her say it. So in the 3D universe, imagine two like rings, two solid metal iron rings linked together like this. You can't pull them, right? They're solid metal rings linked together like this. Can you think of a way where you can pull those apart while keeping everything intact? No, you really can't. These solid metal rings are going to be together. You can't pull them apart. They're always going to be intact. Okay. But in 4 dimensions, this is in 3 dimensions, but in 4 dimensions, there's a way where you can pull these apart easily, so easily. How? How can you wrap your mind around that? It's very hard. It's almost impossible. And the way she explains it is, imagine if you had 2 concurrent circles on a like paper. Like, I'll draw it for you. Like you have one circle and then inside is another circle. Okay, can you see? Can you see? No, you can't see. Okay, imagine one circle and inside is another little circle. How can you get the little circle out of the big circle? You can't, right? Like think about on 2D, you have this drawn on a piece of paper. Without breaking the circles, there's no possible way to get that little circle out of the big circle. On 2D, if you have a circle drawn and a little circle inside drawn, you cannot get that little circle out of the big circle in 2 dimensions, right? You just can't. However, if you bring that knowledge to 3 dimensions, now imagine if those 2 circles were 3D and they become iron rings of different sizes. You can simply pull the middle one out. Easy. They just are separate. You can think of dimensions that way. So in 4D, so in 3D, if we had 2 rings interchanged like this, iron rings can like very solid. In 4D, there's a way where you can just pull them apart. Isn't that weird? Isn't that so crazy? And it's because the way we perceive our reality slowly breaks down until we are in the absolute, and there is no time and there is no space. So in 4D, in 5D, in whatever, all the other dimensions, time and space kind of break down. Time and space separate from each other. We can separate time from space. And I know it's weird and I know it feels like it makes no sense, but we can separate time from space and we could pull those rings apart. When it comes to our minds, let me talk about our mind. I know we're going all over the place in this live, but just bear with me. So physicists and scientists or like neuroscientists have measured our brain waves, and our brain waves oscillate, especially when we're meditating or doing something where our brain is a really coherent frequency. A lot of times our brain gets measured like this. You might feel that, you might feel like your brain is doing this, and that's because it is. But when you, for example, like put your hand on your heart, close your eyes, imagine something you're grateful for and feel the love in your heart, your brainwaves and your heart waves actually begin to match each other, and they begin to oscillate at a much more coherent frequency, and they oscillate at like a very smooth, even defined way. And what scientists measured, when it measures the oscillation of our brainwave frequency and it measures the distance it's going, what happens is that, okay, so on this upward, when our brain's going like this, the middle chunk, the vast majority of that is of course in our 3D time and space reality. So most of those distances that our brainwaves are traveling are located in our time and space reality. However, it is inherent that since it's oscillating at that very, very peak, at that very, very top point, our brain actually has to hit infinity because it has to go the other way. So at that infinity, we're in our time-space reality, then it has to hit infinity so it can turn back around. So for infinitesimally small seconds, we as humans, our consciousness is in that absolute. Our consciousness is actually in that whole infinity void. Our consciousness goes from our 3D reality for a tiny, imperceivably small second, much, much less than a second. We actually are locked into the absolute or the universe or source or whatever. And in between, so for an infinitesimally small amount, in between our time space and in between that absolute, we're actually in those other dimensions for an imperceivably small amount of time. A lot of things online teach us to go into those other dimensions, and it's because we can. It's because we are many, like uncountable amount of times per day for a tiny instant, infinitesimally small instant. We are in those other dimensions and we are in the absolute. This is real. This is science. So the way that you can use all of this in your own world and apply it to your life is, one, just sit on it. I know I sound crazy, but just sit on it and vibe with it and think about, whoa, that's so crazy. That's so crazy that I'm in other dimensions many times a day. That's so crazy that quantum leaping means jumping from one energy level to the other instantaneously without measuring the distance. Electrons jump from one energy level to the other. There is no perceivable distance. That is quantum leaping. So how can we do that in our own life? How can we leap from our one dimension to another? How can we leap from 3D dimension to the absolute, where everything is clear and we are all knowing and we are manifesting our highest selves? Because also in the absolute is where the infinite possibilities arise. So how can we use that in our own life? And the way to use it in our own life is to get in those focused states where we're really making our brainwaves and our heart waves coherent and matching them and focusing on that tiny. Our goal is to stretch that part where we're in the absolute or those dimensions, stretch that farther and be in those other dimensions longer, because time and space aren't coherent. Time and space aren't attached the same way they are in our 3D reality. And the more we can visit those other dimensions, the more we can break apart time and space. And this is why manifesting works, because manifesting works when you quantum leap by envisioning the future, right? So you quantum leap in your life by envisioning the future you want and acting as if you have it now. You're separating time and space. You're taking what you want and feeling as if you have it now. So you're actually just accessing those other dimensions. And I know it's a weird way to think about it, but it is real. You're accessing those other dimensions at a faster rate. So inside those other dimensions where you can separate time and space, you are. So the more you're sitting there feeling those feelings as if, and you're acting as if you already have what you want, you literally are pulling it from the future. You are literally pulling it from the other dimensions into your reality, because you're accessing that power where time and space aren't connected and bringing it to you right now. So if you have any questions, comment below, let me know. I would love to try to answer them. Thank you for sticking with me.